don't know what else to say, I mean, the shift, it's real, The shift is real.
Brothers and sisters, the shift is real.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Right. But what if the secret to true greatness isn't about, grinding harder or hustling faster? Like waking up at 4 a.m. just to beat the competition.
Right, that whole exhaustion Olympic thing we do.
Exactly. What if true greatness actually requires you to, log out of the hustle completely and log into, a cosmic server?
Man, that is the question.
It is. So welcome to today's Deep Dive, everyone. We are unpacking a blueprint from 1910 that fundamentally challenges, pretty much everything we've been taught about finding our purpose.
Yeah, it really turns it all upside down.
It totally does. We're looking at Wallace D. Wattles' century-old text, The Science of Being Great.
Mm-hmm.
And, Wattles is usually famous in those prosperity circles for his other book, The Science of Getting Rich.
Which is a classic in its own right, yeah.
Right, but this specific text, The Science of Being Great, it just keeps intuitively surfacing in modern conversations about purpose and legacy. And our mission today isn't to look at this as some rigid, proven formula or a get-rich-quick scheme.
No, not at all.
We're treating it as a profound spiritual practice. We're decoding his blueprint for moving from this mindset of scarcity and frantic competition to one of deep creative trust. And figuring out how you can apply these daily rhythms to your own life today.
It's a profound shift in perspective, especially, when you consider how most of us operate by default.
Oh, for sure.
I'll share a bit of my own background with this text, actually. Years ago, I hit this deeply stagnant period in my life. I was just feeling incredibly stuck.
Wow. Yeah, I think we've all been there.
Yeah, just searching for some kind of anchor. And I stumbled across a digital copy of this book online, an ebook. I saw the title, The Science of Being Great. And frankly, I thought it sounded a bit goofy.
Right. Because it sounds
like an ego trip. Yeah.
Yeah.
It felt overly grand, maybe even a little arrogant,
Totally. The Science of Being Great. Okay, buddy.
Right, exactly. But I read it anyway. And the core principle of inner trust, when I applied it literally to my daily routines, it fundamentally changed my trajectory.
Wait, really? Just from applying the daily stuff?
Yeah. It shifted how I processed stress, how I approached my work, and just how I viewed my own capacity. It was mind-bending.
That initial skepticism makes total sense, though. But right in Chapter 1, Wattles introduces this concept that strips the ego completely bare. He presents this contrast between living as a football versus living as a flowing spring.
Mm-hmm. The football analogy is brilliant.
It is. So living as a football means you have resilience, right? You can take a hit, you bounce back, you react strongly to force. But a football originates nothing.
Right. It only moves when it gets kicked.
Exactly. It only moves when it is kicked by circumstances or the economy or, other people's opinions. It's entirely at the mercy of external physics.
And the alternative he proposes is the flowing spring, which operates on a completely different mechanism.
Yeah.
A spring doesn't wait to be kicked. It has its own internal hydrostatic pressure. It taps into this deep underground aquifer, and the power originates from within, pushing outward.
Oh, that's such a good visual.
Right. But most of us are conditioned from a very young age to operate as footballs. We just let our environment dictate our inner state.
Oh, absolutely. Like if the weather is gloomy, our mood drops.
Yeah. Or if a project at work fails, our self-worth just plummets. We act only as we are acted upon. But Wattles argues that the frictions and challenges of life, they aren't there to punish us.
Right.
They're designed to force us into self-activity, to compel us to stop being hollow objects waiting for a kick, and to start generating our own pressure from the inside out.
Man, living as the football is fundamentally exhausting, though.
It'll burn you out.
Literally. You're constantly scanning the horizon, looking outward for validation, waiting for some opportunity to present itself, or hoping someone will plug you into their power source.
Yeah, waiting to be chosen.
Exactly. And Wattles is suggesting you build your own internal generator so you bring the power to the room. But, okay, to actually build that generator, he uses some early 20th century New Thought terminology that we probably need to unpack carefully.
Yeah, the language can be a bit thick.
Very. He talks about original substance, cosmic intelligence, and thinking substance. And for someone encountering these ideas for the first time, it can sound incredibly abstract.
Yeah, it sounds a bit out there, but we can ground those terms by looking at them through the lens of everyday spiritual concepts, like faith, intention, and divine stewardship.
Okay, break that down for us.
Well, Wattles posits that there is this formless intelligence surrounding and permeating us that contains all knowledge, past, present, and future.
Right.
And the crucial leap he asks the reader to make is recognizing that human beings are made of this exact same substance. We are not separate from the intelligence of the universe. We're individual expressions of it.
This immediately brings to mind the architecture of modern cloud computing.
Oh, that's a great analogy. Yeah.
Right. Because Wattles is essentially describing the universal mind, or this cosmic intelligence, as the ultimate cloud server. It holds all the data, all the creative solutions, all the wisdom. But the problem is, most of us are walking around relying solely on our own limited local hard drive, our human intellect.
Yeah, just trying to crunch the numbers ourselves.
Exactly. We use our isolated processing power to try and solve massive life problems, and we crash. The system freezes. Wattles argues we have to consciously log in to the cloud, and he calls that actual process of logging in identification and consecration.
And that analogy holds up incredibly well when you examine how he defines those two terms, because identification is the conscious recognition that your local hardware is inherently compatible with the cosmic software.
Yeah, if you realize you even have Wi-Fi.
Exactly. You have to intellectually and spiritually accept that you are connected to the network. But recognition isn't enough. And that brings us to consecration, which is the active downloading and syncing of your will.
Oh, I like that. Syncing your will.
Yeah, you are dedicating your actions to align with that higher intelligence. And Wattles makes this sharp distinction between intellect and soul. He compares the human intellect to a hired lawyer.
Yes, the lawyer analogy is so powerful.
Right, because a lawyer will build a brilliant logical argument for whichever side pays the retainer. If your underlying emotional state is fear, your intellect will act as a lawyer to justify that panic.
Wow.
It'll build a flawless case for why you should be terrified. I mean, the intellect of a thief can plan a masterful robbery, just as the intellect of a philanthropist can plan a hospital.
So true.
Intellect alone is just a processing unit. True greatness requires the soul to direct it.
So, okay, how does someone actually bypass the lawyer of the intellect and tap into the cosmic server? Wattles points to historical figures to demonstrate what this inner posture looks like in practice.
He does, yeah.
He uses Abraham Lincoln as a primary example, specifically during the darkest days of the Civil War. Lincoln was surrounded by highly educated, strategic advisors, but according to Wattles, those advisors were entirely reliant on their local hard drives.
Just looking at the surface data.
Right. They were arguing from intellect, analyzing superficial troop movements, and operating from a place of political panic.
And Lincoln's mechanism for navigating that crisis, as Wattles frames it, was his reliance on spiritual insight. He wasn't just thinking harder than his generals. He was listening deeper.
Listening deeper. I love that.
By maintaining a posture of creative faith, Lincoln tapped into the underlying principles of the universe rather than getting tangled in all those chaotic surface details. And Wattles also points to Eugene V. Debs.
Oh, right, the labor organizer.
Yeah, prominent labor organizer of the era. And what fascinated Wattles wasn't necessarily Debs' specific political policies, but his internal discipline. Debs mastered his thoughts to focus on the inherent good in humanity. Whether he was speaking to a wealthy industrialist or a destitute worker, he treated every single person with radiant brotherly affection.
Wow.
He reverenced humanity, which is an active override of the intellect's tendency to judge and categorize people based on their external class or utility.
Right, because the local hard drive wants to categorize everybody. And Wattles highlights Jesus as the ultimate model of this inner posture, specifically pointing to his model of service versus the mindset of the Pharisees.
Yeah, that's a huge contrast in the book.
Right, because the Pharisee mindset, in Wattles' framework, is the ultimate manifestation of the local hard drive. It seeks dominion, it demands the best seats at the feast, and it uses intellect to exercise power over others out of a deep-seated fear of scarcity. But Jesus modeled true greatness as absolute service. Because when you are the flowing spring, when you know your connection to the infinite server is secure, you can afford to serve without any fear of losing your own power or status.
That is so key. And it is vital to recognize that these figures didn't just, retreat to a mountaintop to ignore the problems of their time.
Right. They were the thick of it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Lincoln directed a brutal war, Debs faced imprisonment for organizing exploited workers. They engaged with intense systemic societal issues. The difference was the internal engine driving their actions.
The energy behind it.
Yeah. They approached massive conflict from a place of creative faith rather than frantic competitive striving.
Which honestly begs a massive question. If these figures were tapping into a higher intelligence to solve the world's problems, how did they view those problems in the first place?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Because if you're listening to this right now and you are looking at systemic injustice or economic disparity or even just your own personal financial struggles, adopting a posture of creative faith might sound dangerously passive.
Oh, it definitely can sound that way.
It brings us to what Wattles calls the perfect but incomplete worldview.
And this is arguably the most psychologically challenging part of his entire philosophy.
Oh, completely.
Because Wattles argues that modern society trains us to view the world as a wrecked ship, storm-driven onto a rocky coast. And under that paradigm, the best you can do is scramble to rescue a few drowning passengers before the whole thing inevitably sinks.
Yeah, that's definitely how the news makes it feel.
Exactly. But that worldview generates a decreasing outlook and a contracting mind. You're constantly operating from a state of triage and despair. Wattles completely inverts this.
What does he say instead?
He says the world is not a wrecked ship. It is a magnificent steamer out on the high seas, with its engines in perfect working order, tacking back and forth simply because humanity hasn't yet learned the right course to steer.
Okay.
He asserts that the world is physically, socially, and industrially perfect for its current stage of evolution, but it is profoundly unfinished.
See, I haven't challenged the utility of that perspective.
I figured you might.
Well, especially for someone in the thick of suffering. Telling someone who can't pay their rent, or who is facing systemic discrimination, that society is a magnificent steamer and that all is right with the world, I mean, it risks sounding incredibly tone-deaf.
Yeah.
Or worse, like an excuse to maintain an unjust status quo. Like, oh, it's just unfinished, don't worry about it.
That is a crucial distinction to make, and honestly, Wattles anticipates that exact friction.
Oh, he does?
Yeah, he is not advocating for passive acceptance or complacency. The purpose of this worldview is psychological strategy. He is asking you to examine the energy you bring to your activism, your work, or your family.
Okay, I'm listening.
If you act from the belief that you are patching up a doomed, decaying, inherently evil world, your spirit shrinks. You become what he calls a patchwork reformer, bailing water out of a sinking ship in a state of chronic burnout and desperation.
Which a lot of people are feeling right now.
Exactly. But if you view society as a perfect but unfinished masterpiece, you transition from a desperate patchworker to a master builder. You are working to complete an unfinished society, which gives you an advancing, expansive mindset.
Ah, okay. He uses the analogy of a train engine off the rails to cement this, doesn't he?
He does, yeah.
Right. So if a massive locomotive is derailed and sitting in a ditch, Wattles says we shouldn't look at it and declare it an evil engine. The steam power driving it isn't evil power. It's a perfectly constructed machine that has simply been displaced.
Exactly.
The power is completely neutral and functional. The track alignment is just off.
And that changes how you approach the problem entirely. You don't try to destroy the engine. You figure out how to leverage its existing power to hoist it back onto the tracks.
That shifts everything.
Right. When you believe the world is fundamentally good and in the process of becoming whole, it changes your neurological response to taking action. You aren't flooded with cortisol and panic. You act, as Wattles says, like a god among gods. You treat everyone, even those struggling the most, with distinguished consideration because you see them not as ruined beings, but as perfect souls in the process of becoming.
So we have this sweeping philosophical framework, but the challenge is translating that into like a Tuesday morning when you're late for work and the kids are screaming, right?
Where the rubber meets the road.
Exactly. How do we actually practice this? And Wattles makes it clear that this shift doesn't happen overnight. You don't start by trying to reform the entire globe. You start by doing small, everyday things in a great way, beginning inside your own home.
And his practical advice for the home is striking.
It really is.
He instructs the reader to treat family members with the utmost courtesy, but immediately follows it with a strict boundary. He says, do not become a slave to them.
Preach.
Right? Do not do things for them that they should righteously do for themselves. And most importantly, he explicitly states that you must not meddle in their personal habits.
That instruction not to meddle is so fascinating because it goes straight back to the concept of consecration we talked about earlier.
Oh, how so?
Well, why do we constantly meddle in our partners or our children's habits?
Hmm.
Because our local hard drive, our intellect, convinces us that we know the best way for them to operate.
Oh, wow. Wow.
You think their internal process is flawed. By choosing not to meddle, by minding your own business, you are actively practicing trust in the divine process unfolding within them.
That is deep.
Right. You improve the world by living as a great personality yourself, not by officiously running around trying to micromanage everyone else's evolution.
Man, and the urge to micromanage is almost always rooted in fear, which brings us to another massive trap Wattles warns against in our daily practice.
Hurry.
Hurry. He dedicates an entire chapter to the concept that hurry is a direct manifestation of fear.
Yeah.
If you are hurrying, it means you fundamentally believe you are going to miss out. You believe there isn't enough time, enough resources, or enough opportunity to go around.
He writes, "He who fears not has plenty of time."
That's the quote, yeah.
And if we break down the psychology of that, rushing is a physiological manifestation of a scarcity mindset. The moment you find yourself physically rushing, your nervous system switches into fight or flight mode.
Mm-hmm.
You have instantly disconnected from the cloud server and reverted to being the football, just reacting to the pressure of the clock.
And to counteract that physiological panic, Wattles prescribes a specific daily rhythm. It's a low-pressure mental and physical exercise designed to reset your habit of thought.
Walk us through it.
So he recommends finding 20 minutes to half an hour a day where you will not be interrupted and lying completely flat on your back.
Not a nap, though.
No, this isn't just about catching some Z's. It's a deliberate somatic reset. In 1910, he was intuitively outlining what we now understand about the nervous system. By lying flat, you remove the physical strain of gravity on the body.
You are intentionally running a system diagnostic.
Exactly.
Wattles instructs you to let your attention travel down your spinal cord, consciously telling your nerves they are in perfect order. You focus on your lungs, your heart, your digestion, physically commanding the body to relax.
Yeah.
You are sending a signal to your nervous system to switch off the football survival mode, which frees up the bandwidth you need to access the spring.
And once you've stabilized the hardware, the physical body, you move to the software. You consciously release external anxieties. You mentally affirm, I have no anxiety about financial matters. I have no worry about my health.
You're clearing the corrupted files from your local drive.
Precisely. Then you mentally affirm your connection to the highest good. You are practicing the realization of your own power, syncing up to the cosmic server until that connection becomes your default operational state.
Because habit rules us all, right?
It does.
Every habit is just a thought repeated until it becomes a conviction. Trusting this inner sense of purpose, overlooking outward for validation, takes immense practice. It is the daily, quiet work of stopping yourself when you're waiting for the next kick and choosing instead to tap into the spring.
It really is an ongoing practice. It's not a switch that flips overnight. And we want to extend a warm, encouraging invitation for you to explore this text yourself.
Definitely.
Sit with the science of being great. Don't treat it as another rigorous checklist to master. Experiment with these principles gently.
Yeah, try one small shift in attention. Practice leaving a family member to their own habits without correcting them. See what happens when you deliberately walk slower when you feel the urge to hurry.
Practice lying flat for 20 minutes and just logging into the cloud.
Before we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final provocation drawn from the text. At the end of the book, Wattles references Ralph Waldo Emerson, who noted that every person has a central idea, a helm by which all the facts of their life are classified and arranged.
A root thought form. So if you were to take a moment today and trace all your current frustrations, your anxieties, your feeling of being stuck in the rat race, trace them all the way down to their absolute root.
What is that root?
What is the central thought form you are currently holding about yourself? Are you operating from a core belief that you are limited, common, or weak? And what would practically shift in your life if you decided, just for today, to uproot that idea?
What would happen if you realize you are not the football, completely at the mercy of the game, but the flowing spring, generating the life you were always meant to live? Brothers and sisters, the shift is real. Log in.